Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Jon Geater. Jon is the Chief Product Technology Officer and co-founder at RKVST. Jon has deep experience in cryptography, cybersecurity, and blockchains, having held senior global technical roles at Sales, eSecurity, Trustonic, ARM, and Encipher. He is also a co-chair of the Supply Chain Integrity, Transparency, and Trust Network. So, Jon, thank you for joining us for our Risk Management Show podcast episode.
Yeah, thanks, Boris. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So, Jon, could you tell us a short story about your career path? What brought you to where you are right now, and what you guys at RKVST are up to these days?
Sure, absolutely. So, well, I'll give you the end first. RKVST, we have a transparency platform that helps any digitally enabled business to track and verify the provenance and the integrity of the data that kind of flows in and out of their businesses and drives their decisions. So how do I come to the provenance and integrity question? Started out in hardware crypto back in 2000, building hardware security modules for people like banks, credit card processing, that kind of thing. Went from there to ARM, and the idea was, why should only banks and governments be able to afford these big, expensive crypto boxes that do super secret stuff? I think everybody with a mobile phone in their pocket should be allowed to protect themselves and have security. So the mission at ARM was to really miniaturize that down and take these big boxes and put them inside the chip itself that now is in everybody's pocket in their cell phones. So went from there to founding a little company called Trustonic, making that dream come true effectively. So putting trusted execution inside everybody's cell phone, keeping your secrets safe and your fingerprints and your bank cards and stuff. And then from there went to Thales, looking after sort of product and technology in the eSecurity division. So Thales, I'm sure many folks here will know, is a huge aerospace company, also has a cryptographic products and security group. So I was the CTO of that piece of it, doing the hardware security modules and things. And the one interesting thing that kept cropping up when we were taking some of the world's very best enterprise security products and PKIs and hardware security modules and stuff. And frankly, all this stuff is very sort of encryption focused in the market. We were trying to apply that into our big civil projects as well. So I had some interactions with the smart grid projects, for example, some self-driving vehicles, a little bit with various other sort of drones and train projects as well, trying to put security in these things. And where there always seemed to be a bit of a gap was how you take this sort of digitally enabled infrastructure and really make it trustworthy and make it so that the people on either end or the people in the middle of this cyber physical system could really trust what was going on. And it felt like something was missing, and it felt like what was missing was this idea of strong provenance for the data and operations are doing with, who did what when, where did it come from, and why do we think it's a good idea right now to automate this thing that previously we would have had very strong physical controls on. And so that's why I started RKVST.
Fantastic. So I believe that we will have a very thoughtful conversation on the topic of the need for a new approach to trust in increasingly digital or digitized supply chains. So we know that digital supply chain become very prominent, specifically after the COVID era. So, Jon, can you explain us what is a digital supply chain and what implication does it have for security and risk management?
Yeah, that always a fantastic question. And I think there are two different answers to that, but they come to the same place. So in one sense, the digital supply chain is simply recognizing that our traditional supply chains are increasingly digital. We do many more things automatically, many more goods and exchange of value is is digital now. It happens on computers, it happens in databases, and so on. And looking at the sort of increasingly digital supply chain, what that means for that is because we can do more faster, we are doing more faster. And the weight and volume of digital documents and digital decisions that are being made is vastly greater than what we used to have manually. And so, in one sense, digital supply chain simply means recognizing that our supply chains are not only digitized, but are much bigger, faster, higher volume, and so need a different approach. But the other answer, which for some people is desperately obvious, and for other people is a little bit eye-opening, is that our digital products themselves have a supply chain which is extremely deep, but often kind of hidden. Which is, where do I get my software from? Where do I get the code from that went into that software? Where do I get the data from that's instructing that software to do something? Anytime digital information flows through across from one company to another, that's a digital supply chain too, which is a little bit hidden, was previously sometimes caught up in things like shadow IT concerns, whatever. But actually, I think people started really waking up to this when issues like Log4j were highlighted. It's like we've been through loads of sort of big fantastical things like Stuxnet, but everybody knew that wasn't going to happen to them. But then we had ransomware kept coming out, and people started getting a bit tired. And then, it feels like Log4j was just, there's nothing particularly special about it, but that was the straw that broke the camel's back, where people said, gosh, I thought I was buying a box from my supplier, but actually there's loads of open source software in here. There's a supply chain of other decisions and other software and other liability and other risk that I can't see, and I would now like to take control of that. And so, the other digital supply chain is that one that's increasingly being sort of wrapped up in the software security world of, where did all this stuff come from? And am I aware of the risk I'm importing into my business by having it?
Mm-hmm. All right. So recently, Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI, quit Google, warning that in the near future, AI will flood the internet with false photos, videos, and text, and the average person would not be able to know what is true anymore. So what are the key challenges and risks associated with digitized or digital supply chains when it comes to building trust, and how average company or person can approach this?
Yeah, that obviously is a really tough question, but I think we've recently had the coronation of King Charles III here where I live in the UK, and very soon after the coronation of King Charles III, somebody released a set of AI generated images, pretty accurate, nice looking images of King Charles and various other members of the royal family having a great party, smoking cigars, drinking cocktails, that kind of thing. And I like this as an example because people have seen them and they're fun pictures. And I very strongly subscribe to the idea that there is no morality in AI. It's not good or bad. The question is, what is it used for? And so if somebody presents these images of Charles as art, then I think they have value as art, and that's fine, and people can enjoy them. However, if someone were to represent these pictures as taken with a long lens photograph and sold to a newspaper to be printed as true, well, that's a problem. That's a bad use of those things. But you can't tell from the data itself. You only find out once it's used. And so that's a very kind of thorny, difficult problem if you try to solve all aspects of it. But actually, if we come back to this idea of provenance and integrity on all data, really, it doesn't matter if it's a photograph or an invoice or anything else. If those things are nicely stamped by an identified producer who solemnly swears or attests in the technical language of the standards, if they attest that this is a thing that they generated with DALL-E and it's intended as art, Great, and you can check that, and you can independently verify that, and anybody, any picture editor getting it in the newspaper can immediately say, okay, this isn't fit for use. And the same is true the other way around. I think in case anybody has a sort of very defensive mindset and says, well, what if they just lie, or what if they don't make any claims at all? We can start to build communities where making these claims and kind of taking responsibility for your data becomes a normal thing. So if I'm a newspaper editor, or I run a big web platform, or if I'm taking things like software updates in my automated CI/CD or network protection system, whatever it is, if somebody sends me something and they haven't attested it and solemnly sworn on their own name that this is a good thing and they stand by it, I'm just not going to use it. I'm going to throw it away. And I think that community approach to mutual responsibility, say, I'm giving you something, I promise it's good, and you saying, I'm taking this thing and I'm taking it for this fit purpose, although that sounds like it might add a little bit of friction to what you're doing, it helps with the other really big issue that's coming along with AI and AI generated content, which again is volume. Because of course we've always had rich people who could hire artists who could create very accurate pictures of things. Right? The existence of fakes is not a new problem. What's the new problem is that it takes 5 seconds now for anybody in the world to create an infinite number of fakes. Exactly. And now we have to spend all our time. And this is the whole, I used to, when I was at Thales, I was design authority for quite a number of our regulated products. And so part of my job was to go through checking all the paperwork from the suppliers and the compliance and the conformance stuff. And I could just about do that in a once a quarter exercise, catching up with my whole team who did the sort of daily paperwork for me. I could never do that now. If I got sent the volume of fake paperwork you get, it just doesn't stand up to the sort of manual double checking verification that we used to do, which absolutely works. I've got all the respect for processes and verification and policy-based risk management. It all works and it all comes from a good place, but I don't think it will stand up to the volume of fake data and things that can now be thrown at us.
Mm-hmm. So let's drill a little bit deeper. So for example, if we take a life of a risk manager or CISO or compliance manager with regards to all this digital supply chains, if there is one thing that they should start to prioritize now, what is it? What would it be?
So I think for me, assuming everything else is kind of okay, and what they're looking to address is this kind of the real digital transformation, as opposed to just doing stuff on computers, which is what a lot of people do. But if you're trying to address this new phase of digital transformation, I really do think that embracing this idea of a digital supply chain, and therefore treating the software and data that comes into their business with exactly the same respect as the physical items and the human beings that come into their business, I think is a very, very valuable thing to do. So if you think it's worth tracking when people use their fob to enter a business, and you think it's worth tracking when people use their password to enter the network, it's also worth tracking when documents or data or software updates or policy documents come into your business too. And you can do that with this data provenance tracing, just the same as any other asset. So I think that's the thing. It's like we've got used to authenticating people because we knew it was important to know who's in the business. We've got used to authenticating machines because we've got used to knowing that we need to know what machines and software are running in our data center. And it is now time to start thinking about authenticating data, because we need to know what instructions we're being given and what decisions we're making too.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we can discuss a little bit about your solution. So what is this your specific use case that is best in the eyes of your customers? So
we've got 3, I would say, really good areas that highlight the value of sort of tracing and really keeping strong provenance records on on critical data. And they do all come down to ultimately some combination of sort of risk management and covering yourself, knowing that you made a good decision, or the decision making itself to say, well, I believe this is a good signal, and so I will make a decision, or even automate a decision based on this signal that's coming in. So one area where we've got quite a lot of activity, and indeed, I'm just packing my suitcase right now to head over to Vienna to attend a UN conference on this topic, is nuclear material handling.
Oh, yeah.
And the basic thing is, we track the physical items around. It's obviously increasingly digitized with the paperwork that follows them. We don't necessarily have physical paperwork anymore. And mistakes in that area are thankfully rare, because the people doing those jobs are extremely professional and they know what they're doing, and all of the sort of safety safeguards are in place. But if and when they do happen, they're very expensive, because you have to kind of go back to the start. You have to retrust everything from first principles and so on. So what we're able to do at a very practical sense in those kinds of scenarios where you've got lots and lots of gates and lots of risk prevention in place, is to cut down the number of duplicates, cut down the possibility of using an old or outdated version of a document, because there's always like the original, then the copy, then the verified copy, then the sent copy, and things can go wrong with transcriptions and things. So we're able to cut that down into essentially one single source of truth that says, well, if I, as the recipient, can see that this type of waste material is in a truck and it's coming to me right now, I know that's true, and I can prepare myself, and I can be more efficient, and all the rest of it. So that kind of logistics, really, but logistics where it really matters, and there are consequences to getting out of date paperwork or delays or whatever. That's always a good use case, and that really comes down to the fact that if a participant can see something, instead of having to think, is this email that I received from a person at the other company, is this the right version? Is it were they authorized to send me this thing? Is this PDF the one I should action? Actually, you just go on the platform and you know for sure that person definitely signed it off. They are qualified, and that's what I'm supposed to do. So that's a good one. Two other areas that are hot for us are the software case. So software supply chain, software security is something of a hot topic right now. And indeed, in the standards arena, a lot of what I do with sort of IETF and some other of the sort of fundamental standards bodies is focusing around this idea of getting your software house in order. So am I using the right version? Are there known vulnerabilities to it? Some folks are starting to use software bill of materials. So, well, how do I make sure I attach the correct software bill of materials to the correct bit of software and then check that it's actually true? Yeah, all of these issues of large of the software estate are really covered pretty well. And that's a subtly different challenge that we're solving there, because it's not so much about sort of matching physical paperwork to virtual paperwork, or necessarily sort of preventing two people who know each other from having an accidental mistake or whatever. But the scale of distribution for the software side, especially once you get into things like open source or consumer, is huge. You never know when you're writing software where it's going to end up, or who's going to use it, or what their use case is, or even if you've gone through a reseller, who do you ask, or who do you tell when you have a vulnerability or a patch? It's just really hard. And so the challenge being solved there really is again about sort of risk detection and mitigation, in finding out as quickly as possible that you're vulnerable and what to do about it and where to move to, but without having to set up huge like email campaigns or posting everything on Twitter, everything's time, or maintaining big bilateral links that are very inefficient and lossy. So software supply chain one is a big one for us. And then a bit of a curveball, but very interesting case for us is that we have a customer tracking carbon offset equivalents on the platform. And this is interesting because the first two, and most of the uses, I have to say, for for the platform and for the standards that we're developing alongside it are really about integrity and accountability. So people are playing a role in a supply chain. They're paid to do a job. And what we do is we make it easier and quicker and cheaper and more efficient to make sure everybody's doing their job properly. In the carbon case, there's an additional kind of virtue to the GRC angle on this, because in those kinds of markets, actually people really count transparency as a virtue. So what these folks are doing really is holding themselves to account right from the beginning to say, we know there's a lot of fraud in this kind of market. We know that people can, generate credits out of fresh air, or, double sell them or something, or, it very much, it's astounding how often the calculations of the sort of carbon equivalents exactly match some tax liability or other. And what they're doing is saying, we've got an honest business. We have calculated this thing. We've had it all certified and verified. And here's all the stuff. And as it gets used or as it gets allocated, it's plain to see for the whole community of people where things have gone, where they've come from, and that they're genuinely making an environmental impact and they're genuinely operating ethically. So that sort of ethical transparency is also a good emerging use case for the kind of things that we're doing.
Right. So, John, I would like to ask you your personal point of view. What is the major misconception in your field that you strongly disagree with?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Gosh, there were lots. What's the most important one to go for? I'm a strongly opinionated person, I'm afraid. So I think for actionability, I think one reason why people don't do more of what we're doing is that the traditional infosec industry is very good these days at selling hopes and dreams and magic boxes. I was at the RSA conference a month ago now, and the very, very first booth that I saw was kind of vendor advertising said, "End cyber risk now." That was their slogan. End it. It's just, there you go. Just buy one of these things. Have a coffee with us for 5 minutes, and cyber will evaporate. And that's just such nonsense. But there's so much of that about that when it comes to adopting something which is effectively policy-based security is really what we're doing. You have a very short, brief exchange to establish provenance and credibility of data and people, and then you can move forward. Even that sometimes is considered too much for people, because they could go over to one of the shiny enterprise vendors and they can just buy a box that ends cyber risk. So I think that whatever level of detail, the thing that I very strongly agree with is this idea that continuing down the same path that we went down for the internet and for enterprise security, that will not make supply chain or cloud first or digital infrastructure, that won't make it any better, because it came from a fundamentally different place where you had essentially one computer defending itself against a small number of physically located people. And we managed to stretch that so far, but we can't stretch it any further. And when we look at things like, if you want a more sort of technical view of the same thing, a lot of folks still sell the idea that a digital signature is like ultimately powerful, and all you need to do is sign something and then you've got total integrity on your data. The problem with that is that it doesn't prove anything on its own. If you have a sufficiently risky environment, or you live for a sufficiently long time, then the fact that some mathematics happened at some point in time doesn't say anything about whether the hardware is actually secure, or whether a sub-CA has been breached, or whether a bad random number generator was used, or whether a company has been bought by a power that you no longer politically agree with. All of which, by the way, are things that have happened in the last 5 years to cause massive PKI-based breaches that people don't like talking about. So I think that's the that's the thing. The idea that buying more magical products from the enterprise space is going to fix this much more kind of natively networked infrastructure problem. It's not going to happen. We're going to keep on getting breaches like the MSI breach from last week that I'm sure is plaguing many people listening right now.
Right, fantastic. So if we summarize our interview, if someone who is listening to this interview would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would that be?
So I think the first major takeaway is congratulations for getting this far in the thing. You must be interested in protecting your data. So do make sure that you understand what data is crucial to your digital decisions. If you're taking signals and making automated decisions, you need to get that data actually authenticated and know where it came from, have very strong provenance on it. Otherwise, the only thing to fall back on really is manual processes, searches of emails, or very clunky point-to-point systems that kind of clog up your supply chain and vendor choices. So in whatever way, identify where the risky data is coming from and then start to automate that validation and provenance. The second takeaway as well, of course, you might want to know how to do that. So obviously, everybody's welcome to check out my products. We have a free tier on the platform. You just go to the website and sign up, and you can play with it. So I would absolutely encourage that, but also just to give comfort that this is an industry, not just one guy talking. Check out the IETF SCIT standards. So that's IETF. That's the Internet Engineering Task Force, who also define things like TLS. So we're defining the standards there. It's the Supply Chain Integrity, Transparency and Trust Working Group, and there we're defining standards, so completely open, multi-vendor, multi-operator standards for doing this same thing of making strong attestations on your data to cover yourself and your own liability, and also verifying those strong attestations from your partner's data so you can cover your risk and potentially start really automating away all of the validation and verification and retrusting of the torrent of data that I'm sure comes in to your engines every day.
Fantastic, John. Thank you very much for this very informative interview, and I will hope to collaborate more with your company, with global risk community. We as a community of risk managers and compliance professionals are always looking for advanced companies that trying to solve a very important solution.
Definitely. Thank you, Boris.